Welcome back. Today, we are investigating the mysterious death of Tutankhamun, the boy king who ruled Egypt, died at only 19, and left behind one of archaeology's most famous unanswered questions. Inside a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a young pharaoh lies beneath layers of gold. His face is hidden behind one of the most iconic masks in history. His burial treasure is extraordinary. But his life was short, his reign was brief, and his death still raises questions. For nearly a century, one mystery has followed him out of the darkness. What killed Tutankhamun? Was he murdered in a palace conspiracy? Did he die in a chariot crash? Did a broken leg become fatal? Was he already weak from inherited disease? Did malaria finish what injury had begun? Or have later generations built a murder mystery around a king who actually died from a combination of ordinary, brutal realities in the ancient world? To answer that, we need to begin with the young king himself. Tutankhamun lived during the 18th dynasty of ancient Egypt, one of the most powerful periods in Egyptian history. Yet he came to the throne after a revolution. His probable father, Akhenaten, had overturned the old religious order and elevated the worship of the Aten above the traditional gods. Temples were disrupted, priesthoods lost power, art changed radically, royal images became unfamiliar, the political and religious balance of Egypt was shaken. Then, after Akhenaten's reign and the shadowy rule of one or more short-lived successors, a child became king. He is thought to have taken the throne at around 8 or 9 years old. He was first known as Tutankhaten, meaning the living image of the Aten. But during his reign, the old gods returned to favor. His name was changed to Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. This was not a minor detail. It signaled a public reversal. The old cults were restored, temples were reopened. A new political order was trying to stabilize Egypt after religious upheaval. That means Tutankhamun, though famous today, may not have been powerful in the way later pharaohs were. He was young. He ruled only around 9 years. And much of the real authority may have rested in the hands of older figures at court, especially the official eye and the general Horemheb. These men matter because whenever a young king dies suddenly, suspicion follows the adults who stood closest to power. And Tutankhamun did die suddenly. He seems to have died around age 19. His tomb was smaller than the tombs prepared for major kings of the period. The burial appears to have been arranged quickly. Some objects in the tomb may originally have been prepared for someone else and then adapted for Tutankhamun. This has often been taken as a sign that his death was unexpected. That conclusion is probably correct. But unexpected does not automatically mean criminal. A person can die suddenly from disease or accident, especially in the ancient world. Still, the setting invites suspicion. A teenage king dies. His burial is hurried. The man who likely oversaw the burial, appears to become king afterward. And within years, another strong figure, Horemheb, emerges and eventually rules Egypt. This looks, at first glance, like the perfect murder case. That idea became even stronger in the 20th century, when the mummy of Tutankhamun began to be examined more closely. Howard Carter discovered the tomb in 1922. It was one of the greatest archaeological finds in history because the tomb was relatively intact compared with many royal burials. The gold, furniture, chariots, shrines, jewelry, statues, and everyday objects created a global sensation. The boy king became world famous, not because he had been the greatest ruler of Egypt, but because his tomb had survived. Then came the darker part of the story. When Carter and his team removed the mummy from its coffins, the body had been heavily treated with resins during burial and had adhered tightly to the coffin and wrappings. The process of removal damaged the remains. Later, when X-rays and scans were made, researchers had to work with a mummy already altered by both ancient embalming and modern excavation. That point is essential. Every theory about Tutankhamun's death must deal with evidence that is incomplete, damaged, and sometimes misleading. One of the earliest and most dramatic theories was murder by a blow to the head. At one point, X-rays were interpreted as showing loose bone fragments inside the skull. Popular writers imagined a deadly strike. A young king is killed. The body is buried quickly. A court insider takes the throne. The case seems solved. But later, research weakened that theory considerably. CT scans indicated that the bone fragments inside the skull were most likely related to post-mortem damage or to the mummy's treatment and handling. In other words, the famous head injury may not have been the cause of death at all. It may not even have happened during life. This is one of the most important lessons in the Tutankhamun mystery. The best-known explanation is not always the best supported one. Once the skull injury theory began to collapse, attention shifted to other parts of the body. One of the most important findings was damage to the left leg. There appears to have been a serious fracture near the knee. Some researchers argued that this injury happened shortly before death. If true, it could be highly significant. In the ancient world, a major open fracture was dangerous even for a king. Without modern antibiotics, severe infection could become fatal. A badly broken leg could also suggest another theory, the chariot accident. Tutankhamun was buried with chariots. Egyptian elite culture included hunting and display. Some researchers proposed that the king fell from a chariot or suffered a violent crash. A fast-moving vehicle, a young man, a broken leg, and sudden death. Once again, the story seems to fit. But there are problems. First, the exact condition of the leg is debated. Was the fracture truly sustained shortly before death? Or was some of the damage caused during mummification or later handling? Second, the image of Tutankhamun as a vigorous chariot rider may be exaggerated. Examination of the body and other evidence suggests he may have had physical limitations. That makes the chariot theory possible, but not as straightforward as it first appears. And third, even if he did suffer a leg fracture, the fracture itself does not tell us the original cause. A fall, a hunting accident, a chariot crash, or even another form of trauma might produce injury. The broken leg matters. But it does not provide a full narrative on its own. Then came another major line of evidence: genetics and disease. In 2010, a team led by Zahi Hawass published results from CT scans and DNA analysis of several royal mummies connected with Tutankhamun's family. The study suggested that Tutankhamun's parents were close relatives, probably brother and sister. If this reconstruction is correct, it has major implications. Repeated close-kin marriage within royal lines can increase the likelihood of inherited disorders and physical weakness. The study also suggested that Tutankhamun may have suffered from several health problems, including issues affecting the foot and bones. This changed the image of the young king. He was no longer simply a glamorous golden pharaoh or a victim in a thriller. He appeared more vulnerable. Some evidence suggests he may have had a club foot, or at least serious foot deformity. The tomb contained numerous walking sticks and canes, far more than many people would expect in the burial of a healthy young athlete. Wear on some of these walking sticks suggests they were not purely ceremonial. He may have actually used them. If Tutankhamun had difficulty walking, then the picture of him racing in a chariot through the desert becomes less secure. He could still have ridden. He could still have hunted symbolically or in controlled settings. But the evidence pushes us away from imagining a fully robust warrior king. Instead, we may be looking at a physically fragile young ruler living under intense expectations. That fragility becomes even more important when we add the next piece of evidence: malaria. The same 2010 study reported evidence of malaria parasites in Tutankhamun and some other mummies. If that finding is correct, then Tutankhamun may have been suffering from malaria around the time of death. Malaria can be severe even in otherwise healthy people. In a physically weakened person, it can be devastating. Now combine the possibilities: a young king with inherited health problems, possible mobility issues, a serious leg injury, and malaria. This is no longer one neat cause of death. It is a dangerous cluster. A fractured leg can lead to infection, blood loss, or immobility. Malaria can weaken the body further, produce fever, and reduce resilience. Underlying skeletal or circulatory problems may make recovery even harder. Instead of searching for one dramatic wound, we may need to think in terms of combined stress. This interpretation is less cinematic than murder, but history often is. Still, murder has never completely disappeared from the discussion. Why? Because the political context remains suspicious. Tutankhamun dies young. I becomes king. There is a striking diplomatic text from outside Egypt that adds fuel to the fire. After the death of an Egyptian king, often identified as Tutankhamun, an Egyptian queen wrote to the Hittite king Suppiluliuma I, asking him to send one of his sons to marry her because, in her words, she had no son and did not want to marry a servant. This is one of the most extraordinary documents of the age. An Egyptian royal woman, probably Tutankhamun's widow, Akhenaten, appears desperate enough to seek a foreign prince rather than accept someone already in the Egyptian court. The Hittite prince who was sent, known as Zananza, never arrived. He died on the way, apparently killed. The Hittite king was furious and blamed the Egyptians. Now step back and think about what this implies. A young king has died. His widow fears or refuses a marriage to someone within Egypt. A foreign prince is summoned. That prince is killed. Soon afterward, I becomes king and appears in a scene from Tutankhamun's burial equipment, performing the opening of the mouth ritual, a highly significant act. It is easy to understand why people see conspiracy here, but conspiracy around succession is not the same as proof that Tutankhamun himself was murdered. The widow's desperate letter may show that she was politically trapped. It may show that I or another court figure was trying to force a marriage. It may reveal chaos after the king's death. But the text does not describe Tutankhamun being killed. It describes a struggle over what came next. That distinction matters. The court may have been dangerous even if the king died of natural causes. Another question concerns the body itself. Was Tutankhamun's burial carried out unusually quickly? Many scholars think so. The tomb seems smaller and less elaborate than expected for a king of his dynasty. Some funerary objects appear to have been repurposed. Even the famous golden mask may include signs that it was not originally made exactly as we now see it. This suggests that preparations were rushed. But again, that fits both accident and disease. If the king died unexpectedly, officials had to improvise. A smaller tomb, perhaps originally intended for someone else, may have been adapted because the grander royal tomb was not ready. Ancient kings did not always die on schedule, and burial deadlines in Egypt were strict because of religious expectations. A rushed burial points to surprise. It does not identify the killer. So what do we actually know with confidence? First, Tutankhamun died young, around 19. Second, his death appears to have been unexpected. Third, he had physical health issues. Fourth, there was a significant injury to the leg that may have occurred shortly before death. Fifth, there is evidence consistent with malaria infection. Sixth, the political aftermath was tense enough that his widow may have appealed to the Hittites for help. These facts are strong. What about the weaker parts of the story? The blow to the head is weak as a cause of death. The murder by skull injury theory is no longer persuasive. The exact scenario of a chariot crash is possible, but not proven. The detailed narrative of palace assassination has never been demonstrated, and the famous curse of the pharaoh belongs to modern mythology, not ancient evidence. That curse story grew after the discovery of the tomb, especially after the death of Lord Carnarvon, who had financed Carter's excavation. Newspapers amplified the idea that those who disturbed the king had been marked for death. It was dramatic, profitable, and unforgettable. But it tells us nothing reliable about why Tutankhamun died 3,000 years earlier. Still, the curse legend helps explain why this case has never lost its hold on the public imagination. Tutankhamun stands at the crossroads of archaeology, death, youth, royal power, and mystery. He is famous enough to matter, obscure enough to remain puzzling, and well-preserved enough to generate theories. Now let us examine the leading explanations one by one. First, murder. Strengths of the theory. The succession was politically unstable. I benefited from the king's death, and the widow's Hittite letter suggests fear or desperation. Weaknesses. There is no clear forensic evidence of homicide. The skull injury theory collapsed, and no ancient text accuses a killer. Verdict. Murder cannot be entirely ruled out as a political possibility, but the physical evidence does not currently support it as the most likely cause of death. Second, chariot accident. Strengths. A serious leg injury exists. The burial included chariots, and elite hunting or driving could have led to trauma. Weaknesses. Tutankhamun may have had mobility problems. The exact circumstances of the fracture are uncertain, and the injury does not prove how it happened. Verdict. A traumatic accident remains possible, but it is better understood as a hypothesis about the source of the leg injury than as a complete explanation. Third, infection from the leg fracture. Strengths. An open or severe fracture in the ancient world could be fatal, especially without modern medicine. Weaknesses. The timing and nature of the fracture are still debated, and evidence for fatal infection is indirect. Verdict. This is one of the stronger medical possibilities, especially if the injury happened shortly before death. Fourth, malaria. Strengths. DNA testing suggested the presence of malaria parasites, and malaria could become severe in a vulnerable young person. Weaknesses. Ancient DNA interpretation is complex, and malaria alone may not explain all the physical findings. Verdict. Malaria is a serious contender, especially in combination with other health burdens. Fifth, inherited frailty and chronic illness. Strengths. The royal family appears to have practiced close-kin marriage. Tutankhamun may have had skeletal or foot problems, and the walking sticks suggest genuine mobility difficulty. Weaknesses. Ancient diagnoses are uncertain, and not every proposed disorder has been universally accepted. Verdict. This is less a single cause of death than a background condition that made other dangers more lethal. And that may bring us closest to the truth. Tutankhamun may not have died because of one spectacular event. He may have died because several factors converged in the body of a frail young king. Imagine the scenario. He is already physically vulnerable. He may have pain or difficulty walking. He contracts malaria. At some point, he suffers a serious injury to the leg, perhaps through a fall, perhaps through an accident involving a chariot, perhaps through another form of trauma we cannot reconstruct. The fracture becomes dangerous. Infection, inflammation, shock, or immobility take their toll. The disease burden increases. His body fails. The court is thrown into crisis. His widow fears the men around her. The burial is arranged in haste. And a king who ruled one of the most powerful lands on earth dies before he becomes a man in full. This explanation lacks the clean simplicity of murder, but it matches the evidence more closely. History is often cruel in ordinary ways. Not every mystery ends with an assassin in the shadows. Sometimes a civilization with gold, priests, armies, and monuments still cannot save a sick 19-year-old from fever and injury. There is another layer to this mystery that deserves attention. Why do we care so much about Tutankhamun when he was not the greatest conqueror or builder of Egypt? Part of the answer is the tomb. Because it survived, he became visible. A king with a modest historical footprint became the most famous pharaoh in the world. But part of the answer is also the shape of the story. A child king, a broken dynasty, a golden tomb, a suspicious succession, an undecided cause of death. A widow's desperate letter, a foreign prince murdered on the road, a mummy with injuries, a body possibly weakened by disease, a century of debate. It is the perfect historical mystery because every new answer still leaves a shadow. Even modern science has not fully closed the case. CT scans improved the picture, but did not eliminate uncertainty. DNA studies opened new possibilities, but also raised methodological debates. Scholars still disagree on the exact interpretation of some findings, and because the evidence comes from a damaged mummy inside a unique burial context, we may never obtain certainty. That is the honest ending. Not that anything is possible, not that the mystery is unsolvable in the sense of pure fantasy, but that the surviving evidence points more strongly in some directions than others. The weakest direction is the old dramatic blow-to-the-head murder theory. The stronger directions involve illness, inherited frailty, trauma, and political consequences rather than a proven assassin's strike. So why did Tutankhamun die at only 19? The most reasonable answer is this: he likely died from a combination of physical vulnerability, disease, and injury. Malaria may have been part of the picture. A serious leg fracture may have been part of the picture. Inherited health problems may have made recovery harder. A chariot accident may explain the injury, but it remains uncertain. Murder remains the most famous theory, but not the best supported one. And perhaps that is why the case still matters. Tutankhamun's death sits right at the edge where science, archaeology, and narrative meet. We have enough evidence to reject some myths, enough evidence to build a careful medical and historical explanation, but not enough to remove every doubt. His golden mask promises certainty. His body refuses to give it. In the end, the mystery of Tutankhamun is not just about how he died. It is about how history survives. A king with no great monument of victory becomes immortal because his tomb was sealed. A body wrapped for eternity becomes evidence in a modern investigation. A rushed burial becomes the center of a global story. And a 19-year-old pharaoh, dead for more than 3,000 years, still asks us one final question. If the treasures had never been found, would anyone remember him at all? Yet they were found, and because they were found, his short life became larger than many empires. The gold made him famous. The unanswered cause of death made him unforgettable. So here is the verdict: not a curse, not a proven murder, not a solved case. But a young king, physically vulnerable, probably ill, seriously injured, and suddenly gone. And behind him, a court already moving to decide the future of Egypt. That is the real mystery. Not who opened the tomb, but what, in the final days before burial, happened inside the palace when the boy king stopped breathing.